This is our first Stories of Change webinar, and today's event forms part of the celebrations of the 20th anniversary of the Tyndall Centre for Climate Change Research. And we're really pleased today to bring together CAST and Tyndall Centre researchers with community and third sector organisations to share their insights on low carbon transformation. In a moment, I'm going to hand over to our host for today's event, that's Dr Stuart Capstick. As I say, a little bit of Zoom housekeeping first. So today's webinar is being recorded, and we will include the recording in a follow-up email. We invite your comments and your questions, so please use the Q&A box, which you should be able to open up from the bottom, to ask your questions to the speakers at any point. So just type it in there and we'll get to it when we come to the discussion portion of the event and get through as many questions as time allows. Once we do get to the discussion part of the event, we would love to hear from you. So please use the raise hand button, which you'll find in the chat box, to let us know that you would like to speak. And then once you do that, we can open up your mic so that we can all hear from you. And if you'd like to join the discussion, but you'd rather not speak, then please do make use of the chat box to share your thoughts or anything else that you feel other people in there might find useful. And you can also use the chat to let us know if you're having any technical issues, and we will try and help you out with that. Finally, we're hoping later on in the event to have a presentation to the medium of Welsh. So we'll be providing simultaneous translation for this. There's a really simple one-step process to switch on the simultaneous translation, which we'll talk you through at the time, so you can switch on English interpretation if you need it. One thing I should mention about that is Zoom haven't quite got round to recognising the Welsh language yet, so we will be asking you to choose between English and French, just to add to the excitement and the confusion there. I think that covers it. But say if you do have any technical issues or questions, pop into the chat. And now I'll hand over to our host today, Dr. Stuart Capstick. Thank you, Stuart.
Thanks, Hannah. Hopefully I've got the yellow line around my box, so I think that means I should be speaking and being seen. Yeah, this is the first of two live events we're doing in our Stories of Change series of events. We recorded a couple of webcasts the other week, hearing from community-based projects on how people are making change happen on the ground. So if you haven't seen those already, do track them down, check them out on the CAST website, which is cast.ac.uk. I would say a little bit of background to why we're doing these events. The idea of Stories of Change was conceived within one of the research themes within the Tyndall Centre for Climate Change Research. We have a number of research themes there, and one of those is called Accelerating Social Transitions. And we are primarily social science researchers, not entirely, but we're interested, all of us, in how change happens on the ground, how change happens in society, and how that can be accelerated. Because with all the wonderful research analysis in the world, that doesn't mean anything if you can't actually bring about real change. And one of the ways that you can bring about real and meaningful change is through grassroots initiatives and projects of the sort that we're going to hear from today. So we're very excited to have a number of people who are very actively involved in doing some brilliant stuff on the ground. So we'll hear from them shortly. As Hannah mentioned, these events are part of the Tyndall Centre Celebrations. So Tyndall has been around for 20 years now. So we wanted to celebrate Tyndall's 20th birthday. As it happens, because of COVID, some of our events are being moved to next year, but happily a 21st birthday celebration also makes sense. So we're continuing with some events, and then some are moved forward to next year. I'll hand over to Robert, who's the director of the Tyndall Centre, in a minute, and then Lorraine. But before I do that, I just wanted to say a big thank you to Hannah and Owen. We had the idea for this event within Tyndall, but it's been Hannah Garcia and Owen Spacey who have actually managed to make these events happen, rather than just being a nice idea that somebody dreamt up. So thank you very much, Hannah and Owen. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to introduce you to Robert Nichols. Robert is the current director of the Tyndall Centre, started the job as director last year. He's an expert in climate impacts on coasts, coastal erosions, sea level rise, and so on. He's been working on this in this field for many years, and joined us as Tyndall director quite recently. So I'll hand over to Robert now to say a bit about the Tyndall Centre and the work we're doing.
Right. Well, Thank you. And let me just share my screen here. So yes, so it's 20 years for the 20th anniversary for the Tyndall Centre today. And so the Tyndall Centre was actually established, as been said, in 2000. And it's a partnership. It's a partnership between 4 universities: East Anglia, Manchester, Newcastle and Cardiff. And we also have a growing network of affiliated researchers, currently about 80 people from PhDs up to sort of professors. I think when the Tyndall Centre was established, it was quite innovative, and I think remains so, in terms of that at that time there were lots of centres looking at climate change as a phenomenon, but the overall aim of the Tyndall Centre is to provide evidence to inform society's transition to a sustainable, low carbon and a climate resilient future. So it's addressing climate mitigation and climate adaptation, what we actually do in response to human-induced climate change. To sort of actually accomplish that goal, it's a research centre, and the aim is to conduct robust and independent research to look at both the challenges and the opportunities that are presented by climate change, and also to use that research to inform an open and transparent sort of decisions in society about how to deal with climate change. As Stuart has sort of touched on, we have sort of 4 different themes in the Tyndall Centre, and these the current themes are linked to the Paris Agreement and also the Sustainable Development Goals, and they are reaching zero emissions and building up resilience, so mitigation and adaptation. Also overcoming poverty with climate actions, so the development, the dimension that of looking at development and climate change. And lastly, and this was mentioned by Stuart, accelerating social transitions. And certainly the Tyndall Centre, for the bid for the Cast Centre that's the Cast Centre, Tyndall sort of provided an important foundation, I think, for that bid. And there's a very strong relationship between Tyndall and Cast. And we share many core staff and events as we are today. It's the 20th anniversary of the Tyndall Centre, so this is the annual assembly. The Tyndall Centre has always had an annual assembly, and it's a significant event, and it's also a significant birthday and celebration, albeit rather disrupted by COVID-19, and hence held virtually this year, rather than the planned gathering we had physically in Cardiff 12 months ago. To get the scale of the assembly, we have about 100 attendees registered for this assembly. Last year in Norwich, in a physical event, we had about 80 people attending in person. And the assembly comprises, this Monday and Tuesday, we have the Stories of Change that we're now in. And then on Wednesday, we have an early career event. We always hold this on Wednesday. And then the main assembly, which is looking at issues around things like national and international assessments of climate change, citizens' climate change assemblies, COP26 in Glasgow, that's an important issue in 2021, and the Green Recovery, that's taking place on Thursday and Friday. So I think the Tyndall Centre greatly appreciates Cardiff hosting this important sort of annual event and this important sort of birthday and celebration of Tyndall. And we certainly look forward to continued collaborations across the Tyndall Partnership and with CAST, and the COP26 event in 14 months is really a very important priority and focus for us. And I'd like to extend again a thank you, as did Stuart, to Hannah and Owen for organising today's event. Thank you very much.
Not sure. I think I'm on screen again, hopefully. Thank you very much. But I want to hand over to Lorraine Whitmarsh now to say a bit about the CAST Centre. So the CAST Centre and Tyndall Centre are both very closely linked. In many ways, I often find myself talking about the CAST Centre as being a child of Tyndall. We came together, many of us within the Tyndall Centre, as well as some outsiders, as it were, to come up with the idea of CAST, and Lorraine leads the CAST Centre, as well as a number of other projects, including a major European grant on how to bring about behaviour and lifestyle change. So I'm going to pass over to Lorraine now to tell us a little bit about the work of the CAST Centre.
Thank you, Stuart, and yeah, thanks very much for to everybody for being here today. I just wanted to say, as well as this being the 20th anniversary of the Tyndall Centre, which is a very auspicious thing to be celebrating, but it's also very timely because we've just had the launch of the UK Climate Assembly report that came out at the end of last week. And I was involved in that. And just amongst the many things that have come out of that is a really strong public support for transforming what we eat and our consumption as well. So I think some of the things that we're going to be talking about here in terms of grassroots initiatives to really think about kind of food and what we buy, there's a lot of support from that coming out of the public. So I just wanted to kind of flag that as something else that I think makes this event really important and valuable. Just a few words about what CAST is, for those who don't know. As has been mentioned, many of the people involved in CAST, which is the Centre for Climate Change and Social Transformations, have been involved in the Tyndall Centre for many years. But our centre is a dedicated, broadly social science centre looking at the role of people in mitigating climate change, in reducing emissions. We're funded by the Economic and Social Research Council, and we've been going for a bit more than a year. We started May last year. And those logos that you can see there in the middle are the main partners, several universities, Cardiff, Manchester, UEA, Bath and York, and the charity Climate Outreach. And all those other logos at the bottom are various partners, and there are even more since we put that slide together. The number of partners is growing all the time. People, organisations who have committed to work with us to actually help deliver transformative change. So we're not just interested in understanding how change happens, we're keen to actually try and bring that about as well. The way in which we understand tackling climate change and getting to net zero specifically is that fundamentally it's a social and behavioural challenge. That was made clear in the IPCC's 1.5 report a couple of years ago. It also came out strongly from the Committee on Climate Change's report last year, where they featured this pie chart, which shows the relative contribution of technological and behavioural change to getting to net zero. And the green and blue wedges of that pie together make up 62% of the measures needed to get to net zero are at least in part social and behavioural. So we really need to understand how we can change society, change behaviour to get to net zero. And that's really what we're trying to do in CAST. But not just that, we're not only interested in what we can do to reduce emissions, we're interested as well in how we can improve people's lives. So actually thinking about the well-being benefits, how we can transition to a fairer, safer, healthier, more equitable and pleasant society, as well as one that's better for the environment. So this is the question we're asking ourselves. How can we as a society live differently and better in ways that achieve systemic, deep and rapid emission reductions? We focus on 4 areas, 2 of which map onto today's event, the material consumption and the food one, and then tomorrow's event looks at the other 2, mobility and heating and cooling. These 4 areas together are very high emission activities that historically have been difficult to decarbonise, and they link very strongly with social and behavioural challenges. And within CAST, the way in which we think that we can achieve that decarbonisation in those areas is really by understanding people as agents of change. And what we mean by that is not just that people might be able to take action as consumers, they might be able to adopt new green technologies and use them sustainably, although that's one important role that people can play. It's not just about them voting for green policies, though that's also important, but it's also about the way in which people engage within communities, within organisations and businesses as decision makers, or maybe even leaders, So thinking about all of the things that we do day to day, the interactions that we have, the way in which we can exert change, there are multiple different things that we can do as people. And we're really keen to look across different levels, from the individual right up to the national level, and look at the role that people can play to actually achieve a net zero society. And without going into too much detail, we have 4 themes that really address this. The first one is about visioning, so it's about really understanding what a low carbon transformed society could look like. The second one is a learning theme, drawing on examples of what has worked previously in other countries or maybe happening right now. And so this is partly about today, understanding and sharing best practice in terms of some of the grassroots changes taking place. And then from those 2 foundational themes, we then work across the scales that I mentioned, from individual through to national level, to work with partners to actually co-design and deliver transformative interventions. And then the 4th theme is really about how can we upscale what we find works and actually embed transformation within society, as well as changing what we do as a research centre as well. So there's loads more about what we do on our website, and I just want to say again, thank you so much for being here. I'm really excited to hear all about the examples of good practice that will be shared.
Thanks very much, Lorraine. What I'm delighted to be able to introduce now, Mallory Davies, who is, or Mallory Davies, I think is the correct pronunciation, who's Chief Officer of Partneriaeth Ogwen, which is a community-based food and energy project. I'm going to let Mallory say some more about the work that she's doing, and then following Mallory's talk, we have a panel discussion, but I won't introduce the panelists now. But I will say to all participants on this call, there is a Q&A box. So if you would like to ask Mallory any questions, specifically about what she's talking about, as well as asking any questions or observations more generally about the topic of how change happens and how we can make change happen, then please do feel free to add those to the Q&A. I will try and pick up as many of those as I can when we move into the panel discussion. But now I'll hand over to Mallory to talk about her work.
Diolch yn fawr iawn, Stuart. Thank you. Dwi'n mynd I drio rhannu'r sgrin. I will be presenting Welsh, so I believe there's an interpreter.
Mallory will be presenting Welsh. There is an interpreter available.
Can everybody hear me? I'll just explain how we switch that on. So what you've got to do, if you would like to listen to the presentation in Welsh, you don't need to do anything. You can just keep on listening. If you'd like to listen to the simultaneous interpretation in English, you should see a little interpretation button at the bottom of your screen with a little globe symbol by it. If you click that and choose English, and then you should be able to hear the English over the top. So do let us know in the chat if you have any problems.
Gret. Ydy pawb yn clywed?
Hey, can everybody hear the interpretation? Just check that it works.
Yeah, so Mallory Davies dwi.
I'm Mallory Davies. I am a community developer. I'm the Chief Officer for the Ogwen Partnership, which is a fairly new social enterprise in the Ogwen area. I'm also a volunteer officer with Ogwen, which produces its own energy in the local area. But I want to emphasize that today I am speaking to you as a community developer, and I want to discuss the journey that the Ogwen Partnership has followed from being a fairly small community enterprise and the journey that we have followed to become a successful social enterprise with sustainability at the heart of everything we do. So that's what I'm hoping to do. Just a little bit of information about Ogwen Partnership. It was developed as part of 3 community partnerships coming together and that has enabled us to work on different community projects, and also, as I said, sustainability is at the heart of everything we do, as well as environmental issues, and those themes certainly they are a central theme in all the projects that we undertake. So the first project was to develop this high street building. We had a sustainable community grant to develop that, and we developed a property. We pay. There are 3 floors, a cellar underneath, as well as a flat above. This building is very important to the type of projects that we work on. We also have 5 flats as well as 7 commercial properties, which are rented out for a reasonable rate locally. We also have a library in the Ogwen Valley. So transferring those assets were transferred to our portfolio. We also have the Kenvice Centre. It's also transferred to us from the County Council as well. But we are taking these properties on just to create some kind of property portfolio. What's important is that we use them and there's local ownership over these buildings. We rent shops to young or new businesses to develop the high street, and we also maintain local ownership of these assets. We have a craft shop on the high street, as well as a Welsh bookshop. Over 70% of the local area speak Welsh, so obviously maintaining the Welsh language is important as well. And the environmental project, the first one that we developed, was the Ogwen partnership. This is a quite substantial project. It's a hydro community project where we use water from the area to produce our own energy. And as you can see from the slide, we have managed to raise an incredible amount. I'm just going to check the chat very quickly, just to make sure that everybody can hear.
Stuart, can I just check that people can hear the translation? I'm just catching up with the chat.
Can everybody hear? Could you maybe nod or maybe add to the chat?
Okay, Stuart, I'm not sure if people have...
Stuart, I'm not sure if people have heard the presentation so far.
Hi both. I think as far as I can tell, everyone's getting the translation and the original audio through fine. Thank you.
Was that okay? So am I good to carry on now?
Okay, am I good to carry on then?
Because I can't see the people, so I wasn't sure that people...
Because I can't see the people, I'm not sure if people can actually hear the translation. Okay, so just to carry on.
Please do, Robin. It's coming through lovely.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I'm
okay, sorry about that. You know, when you're doing presentations, it's so difficult to do these via Zoom. It's the first time I've actually done this that's been translated, so virtually anyway. So thank you for your patience, and thanks to Robin for translating as well. So back to the Anniversary project. It's our first environmental community project that we developed. We used the power of the Ogwen River to generate electricity, and also added the power of local people as well, if you like. So we obviously generate electricity, we transfer it to the national grid, but we get a certain tariff for every unit, and all profits stay locally as well. But just to come back to those key words, community ownership, that's a key part of the Ogwen as well. It's local people who actually own the scheme, so all the money is actually raised as part of a community share offer, and we generated this incredible amount in 2 months. 85% of shareholders of Anniversary come from the local area. The vast majority of our members do come from the LL57 area, and that gives a sense of pride to us, the local ownership aspect. We also, during the project, we employed local people as project managers. We also employed builders from Llanuwchllyn in Gwynedd. Build the scheme for us. So there's obviously sustainability in terms of the environment, but also community sustainability as well. And it is a scheme that has brought a lot of attention to the area. And I'm going to talk about how Anniversary has been a catalyst for change for the local area, certainly in terms of increasing the confidence of the local area, raising awareness of environmental issues, and also increased our confidence to work for environmental issues as well as exporting electricity. The Ogwen Partnership has been looking at the potential of using green energy produced locally, how we can use that for the benefit of local homes. And we did work with Energy Local company in 2016, and the partnership recruited for that project. We used green energy for 96 local homes, and over the first 2 years, I think the homes that were part of that saw around a 30% reduction in their electricity use. But more significantly, they could say that they were using energy that had been generated locally. So there are important messages there. Obviously, saving money by using renewable energy, which is actually produced on your doorstep. Just a little bit more information about energy that is created in the area. Those white boxes in front of you, those are all community partnerships. We've got 2 private hydro companies as well. The blue boxes, they are large private developments. And there's also hydro development in Llanuwchllyn as well. In terms of those community developments, we have been collaborating, and I think collaboration is the key word here. But we did work closely with 10 local energy developments. One of them is, well, it's actually called Kideni, which is a combination of almost. We were successful in getting with a lottery bid of $250,000 to bring in these projects together. And just to come back to this point about Anniversary being a catalyst, that was the first project that our partnership developed. Since then, our partnership has developed a local electric car. There's also a project called Edin Ogwen, which brings the community together to plant wild flowers and developing local green spaces in the local area. Annie Ogwen has gone on to develop a solar project. So this solar panels have gone up on 6 local buildings locally, and the energy that's developed there is actually sold back, and it makes the area more sustainable in terms of the energy we produce, and obviously it takes full advantage of solar energy. The Ogwen Partnership, we have also bought a new building next door to our main office. This is now a sustainability hub. It will be a hub for the local community to learn more about opportunities to volunteer on environmental projects and what's going on locally. There's just any local project. Hopefully there will be information available in this sustainability hub on those matters. And the sustainability hub will be home to a new team of people. We've had a £500,000 grant to develop a new green project, and that is a substantial project to prevent poverty in this area. And I think community action is, those are the watchwords really in terms of what we do, because it brings the community together to prevent poverty in the first place, but also raising awareness about climate change and collaborating to do that. In terms of the lottery bid that I mentioned, the key themes are fuel poverty, transport poverty, rural isolation, and empowering communities. And as with the Ogwen Partnership as an organisation, these themes, they are a key part in the entire vision. We employ local people, and as I said, we have grown from a small entity, employing 2 of us part-time. We now employ a team of 15 in total, and we have been part of a new project to offer 4 local people to work with us over the summer for a period of 8 weeks. So we are an important employer locally on the high street, and we are making a key contribution to the area. We also provide services. This is Adam. He does local jobs such as collecting rubbish. He does so on his own, but he also leads groups as well to fulfill his tasks. But we also provide consultation services, helping local businesses drawing business plans and things like that. And that is increasingly important, I think, in terms of the Ogwen Partnership. We are not reliant on grants. We also have rental income. We also provide other consultation services as well. And in terms of COVID, then obviously that's changed people's lives significantly, but we knew straight away when we were having discussions about the lockdown that the Ogwen Partnership had to let go of a number of projects so that we could focus on helping our community. So during that final week before lockdown, we did a leaflet drop to over 3,000 households with the names of 100 volunteers on these leaflets, so that people knew that I could call one of these volunteers to help me. There was also a prescriptions service and groceries in terms of collecting them. That was available straight away, really, during the first week of lockdown. The Ogwen Partnership have also helped to establish the local food bank, and the Ogwen also provided £3,000 to the local food bank, so there's close collaboration here locally. We also opened a crowdfunder, a community support crowdfund. So having this kind of organisation does help to bring these things together in response to issues like this, such as COVID. And the final project that I want to finish with was the Cadwyn Ogwen. So this is a scheme that we're very proud of. It's a response to demand from local businesses. Early in the lockdown period, local business came to us that they were concerned about their ability to provide their food locally or supply the food locally during lockdown. So what we did was we redirected a number of grants to establish an online platform to sell local produce. This is located on the Ogwen Partnership website, and what it is, a number of businesses that can actually sell their produce online, and that those products are then delivered to local homes using our electric vehicle. Therefore, we are responding to the demand from our local community for food, obviously. We can deliver these on a weekly basis. You know, if you compare it to companies like Asda or Morrison's, you can be on the waiting list for weeks, if not, you know, about a month. So this is an important development that we are actually able to offer something locally. This obviously helps the local economy as well. And also, we are reinforcing the local environment that we are using an electric vehicle, which is powered by solar panels developed locally. So in terms of environmentability, in the environment and sustainability and local economy, Cadwyn Ogwen is a scheme which ties together a number of different aspects of things. So this is the electric vehicle that we use. This vehicle has to go back to its owner. It is a local scheme that we've hired it from at the end of October, but we are in discussions with a large local business called Zip World. They said that they can maybe provide us with a van once a week so that we can continue with the food deliveries. Again, that kind of collaboration is crucially important so that partnerships don't come to an end when grants come to an end. You know, we have to be innovative and thinking outside the box, and it's great being able to work with companies such as Zippo to continue with these kind of services. So just to finish with Cadwyn Ogwen, it is an important project because it brings those aspects together, economy, environment, and the economy together, and society together, sorry. And it keeps the local supply chain local. I want to finish just by drawing attention to our vision as an organisation. Joint working is crucial, and that's obviously work well on a community level, but the Ogwen Partnership is part of wider networks. Therefore, we are working with the local Slate project as well. We are also working with 9 social enterprises across Wales, a part of Kidney, as well as the Gwyrddni project, which is an ambitious project which hopes to establish climate assemblies in 5 different areas. So if that works, we'll have a climate assembly in the Ogwen Valley with local people leading the discussions on climate change. So these developments are continuing. You know, back in 2014, it was quite a small project, but I think the Ogwen Valley has come a long way in the meantime, and we're very much looking forward to working together and innovating in the future. So I'm going to finish there. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Mary. That was absolutely fantastic, and thank you to Robin as well for what I assume was completely seamless translation. It certainly seemed that way. There was, I mean, what strikes me from your talk, Mary, is that this sort of dazzling array of projects here, and I think often, I mean, in research terms and often in other sort of projects and initiatives, often I think climate change and sustainability can be kind of treated as a bit of a self-contained special interest project, despite the fact that we often argue that, you know, it's part of all aspects of everyday life, and you know, can't separate these out. And I think the really compelling thing about what you've talked about here is that it shows that you're kind of attending to all sorts of local concerns and needs, the economy, Welsh language, the community, and so on. So I think that's kind of a really impressive piece of work. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to introduce, rather than ask any questions myself, I'm going to introduce our panelists, of whom Mary is one, but I'll just briefly introduce our four panelists, who I hope will be able to open up the discussion further about their experiences of change and how to make change happen, and potentially, I hope, some insights and advice for others. So first of all, I'd like to introduce Pearl Costello, who is Sustainable Food City Coordinator at Food Cardiff. I don't know if people can see you wave, Pearl, but perhaps give a wave in case. So Pearl is involved in this work in trying to promote Cardiff as a sustainable food city. I'd also like to introduce Dr. John McCrory, who is Director of Repair Cafe Wales, who has been involved in setting up repair cafes and giving advice to others so that you don't have to chuck your stuff away. You can get it mended, because there's nothing worse than throwing away things that can be mended. And finally, I'd like to introduce Jane Booty from Benthyg, who is involved in running a library of things where community members can borrow household items. And this is one of the things that has been identified again in the academic literature, that a more sustainable society may be one that moves towards sort of borrowing and sharing products and services. But that's all very well to talk about in the abstract. Kind of how do you actually make that happen on the ground is the kind of the really key point that I think we can learn from this sort of work. So what I would like to ask our panelists, and perhaps I could start with you, Jane, is what do you think are the most important ingredients for making change happen on the ground? And please feel free to interpret the word ingredients however you like. What can make change happen? Oh, mute, I think.
Okay, can you hear me now? Yeah, sorry. When I made my list, I was thinking about this. The very first thing I thought was it's got to be people. That's a really important ingredient, and the people have to be passionate, and they have to have the motivation, and they also have to have the time. And then next, I guess you need to have some resources, and that doesn't necessarily need to be financial resources. It could be, again, more people, as many people as possible, really, and possibly a base. We needed a base, obviously, for the Library of Things, but we did need money as well, and then I think you need to be accessible to the local community. We particularly, again, we are in a physical space, so we needed to be accessible. And I think those are the things that I found, those are the things that were most important.
Okay, thank you very, very much, Jane. I think, if I would divide those up into kind of, there's the people-centered things, you're needing the the motivation and the time of people, as well as having the resources and the kind of practical considerations that are necessary. Would you say that reflects your experience, John, in setting up repair cafes? Is there anything else to add as well?
Yeah, I think you hit most of the things that I would really bring up in kind of wider topics. I think making it community focused is incredibly important, because it's not that we're really tribal, but there is a nicer feeling about doing something which is within your local community. It's not like an outside entity imposing itself on your high street. It's Bob and Sheila who live 2 streets over, and that helps people think, this is for me. I think that's really important, that it does feel like it's coming from the people around you, and I think you said that really already. One of the things that I was going to add then to that, to give people something tangible, if you wanted the advice to make something feel like it's in the community, is to try and get people to spread it by word of mouth as much as possible. So ask your volunteers, if you're just starting out, to tell their friends, family, work colleagues, and then ask them to tell people, because it always feels better to hear something that way than through posters are really good, social media is really good, but word of mouth is super helpful, I think. And the last thing I'd add is really to try and make the benefits obvious to people for getting involved. So I think that can really accelerate change happening on the ground, as the question asked, because and most projects have multiple benefits, and there's maybe one very obvious one. Reflecting on our own project at Repair Cafe Wales, we wanted to reduce the amount of waste. So anyone involved can feel good that they are contributing to a reduction in waste, but they're also saving money, and they could also learn skills, and there's a social aspect to it, as there is with most volunteering or community projects. So there are a plethora of advantages or benefits to being involved, and if you make people aware of them, then they're more likely to get involved. That would be my contribution to that topic.
Thanks very much, John. And perhaps I could ask Pearl now, could you tell us, what do you think are potentially the kind of the magic, or not necessarily magic, but the ingredients for making change happen on the ground?
Thank you. It's really good to hear from the other panellists. So I think we're all on the same sort of lines, really. So I think we're obviously all doing something right. But to think about it in the context of what we're working on, if we're considering kind of ingredients, thinking about a recipe, looking back over the last 6 months, we've seen an interesting pathway develop of how we're changing the food system in Cardiff. So firstly, taking an initial disruption or some kind of externally enforced change, for example, people not being able to find yeast in the supermarket during lockdown, and then we add in some kind of social movement or social prompts, for example, people posting on social media the sourdough they've been baking during lockdown. I'm sure plenty of people have seen that. And then we kind of add in the final step of the necessary resources. So this might be things like knowledge, so how you actually bake sourdough loaf, or something, I think as Jane mentioned, time, more people working from home, so actually enabled to do that. And we've also seen this through the quite big grow your own food movement that we've seen during COVID. So similarly, it started off with people concerned about accessing fresh fruit and veg, for example, not prices going up, or people not being able to go out to shop. And then we started to see a bit of an online movement around it. So I looked earlier, and there were news stories like the BBC publishing things like container enthusiasm, how to grow lockdown veg in a tiny space. But also kind of bringing on John's point, it was combined with a lot of really local social prompts as well. So neighbours sharing seeds, mutual aid groups popping up, and groups like Green Squirrel, Grow Cardiff, and others that we worked with, who are kind of doing really local social action. And then with those first kind of 2 ingredients there, teaming up with other organisations so we could support people more with the resource in the form of growing kits or plug plants to give out alongside workshops and so on. So, sorry, it's a bit long-winded, but I wanted to, with that in mind, the disruption element isn't the ingredient that we necessarily want to repeat, especially with things like COVID. So we're kind of focusing on those second two elements, the food system change being attractive and it being easy, or at least having as many obstacles removed as possible for people.
Thanks very much for that. And I think, I mean, a lot of us, I guess, in different spaces, thinking about the disruption from COVID, unwelcome as it was, but, you know, how this might, in one way or another, kind of lead to better ways of doing things, albeit that, you know, there's nothing to celebrate about COVID itself. I'd like to pick up one of the questions from the chat window, the Q&A window here. So there's a question from Irene, who's University of East Anglia. And she says, thank you for a very interesting presentation. She'd like to understand a bit more on how the Ogwen partnership came into being. What were the main drivers and constraints, and what are there lessons that could be applicable to others interested in similar partnerships?
Yeah, well, Partneriaeth Ogwen came together with 3 community councils working together in collaboration. And that doesn't naturally happen. I don't think so. It's quite unique to have 3 community councils come together and, you know, change the way that they usually work. They set up a company called Partneriaeth Ogwen. And by doing that, you know, they made some efficiency savings, which enabled them to employ me as a project manager for various projects. So, you know, it's creating that paid capacity to deliver projects in communities. Yeah, I'd be happy to talk to Irene outside of this forum as well about, you know, the ins and outs of setting up the company, but it's a company limited by guarantee, not for profits. So we can go after grants that a community council would not be able to go after as well. And we operate as a social enterprise. So, yeah.
Thank you for that. And that probably relates to a question from Sarah Amanda, who I know is a colleague at Manchester as well, who was asking particularly about having kind of paid or people employed by the projects, which I guess is very important for kind of having a core team there. I wanted to ask, to pick up on the theme of obstacles or potential obstacles again there. I think I personally feel very inspired to hear about kind of people's stories and projects in this way, but I'm also mindful that probably things haven't always been plain sailing, and that, you know, there are often problems and all the rest of it. So I wondered if any of the panelists could say a bit about, this is not a job interview, but, you know, some obstacles you've experienced and how you overcame them. You know, what are some of the difficulties you've encountered along the way?
Well,
feel free, Mallory.
I'll just talk about Ogwen, the community hydro scheme. You know, anyone who's worked on a community hydro project will know it's never plain sailing. You know, the feed-in tariff was slashed when we were developing our scheme. So we went from 16 pence per kilowatt hour down to 8 pence. You know, luckily for us, we still had a viable project but for a number of organisations like ourselves, you know, that could have been the end of it. We took like over a year to negotiate with NRW, the regulator. So it's just difficult for a community group who doesn't have the environmental expertise. We had to buy in a hydro engineer, we had to buy in bat surveys, tree surveys, you know. Yeah, anyway, it's just a can be a complex project to run and manage, and sometimes policy decisions either at Westminster or Welsh Government level can undermine your endeavours. So that's just one example.
Thanks very much. I guess it sort of illustrates that these, you know, it can be a slog, I guess. You know, it's you can sort of look back and talk about the ingredients of success, but actually there's a lot of battles to fight on the way. I wonder if I could ask Jane the same question. What sort of obstacles or difficulties have you experienced along the way, and how have you managed to overcome them?
Well, we've had one fairly recently, actually, as well. I'll just talk about that because it has been due to COVID as well. We were due to open, we have one branch, one Benthic branch already in Cardiff, and we were due to open a second in Splot in June. Obviously, we weren't able to open back in June, but we then discovered that the actual the venue who had very kindly agreed to house us were unable to, because they needed the space to be because they work with asylum seekers and refugees, and it was important that they carried on doing what they were doing. So we're unable to be there and open. But we've sort of researched other places in the area so that we can just pop up, basically, which will work. You know, that's what we decided that we're going to do. So we will be going to the area, because the area is sort of waiting for us, and a steering committee of volunteers has been established. So we found somewhere that will let us just pop up, because at the moment we're just working on a click and collect basis. So at the sort of our first branch, when people are borrowing, they're borrowing, everything's done online. You can pay online, you reserve online, and then we will tell you, you can come and collect this item at a certain time, and you can return this item at a certain time. And so we can replicate that for the new area. So that, I think that's you know, there have been many obstacles actually along the way, I have to say, you know, yeah, and I think it's the same for all community projects, really, that nothing runs smoothly. And I think one of the lessons that I feel that we've learned is that you want to do everything, and you're not really able to, and it takes time. But you know, when I look back and I think, well, we have achieved a lot, actually, given that, you know, initially there were very few of us, and we have actually done quite a lot in the time that it's taken us. But at times I think we've thought there's all these other things you want to do. I don't know, I think that probably is fair to say that's quite common. You get excited about something and you want it to happen there and, you know, as soon as possible. And you have to think it will happen, you know, if we have the will, but not right now.
Thank you. I'll perhaps turn to Pearl. Have you had similar experiences in wanting to do everything? I guess when it comes to sort of food and sustainability, there are so many sort of different facets to that. What sort of obstacles have you experienced in running your project?
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head in a way. So the two kind of main obstacles, I would say, on a day-to-day basis. The first one is definitely time, in terms of it, echoing that, in terms of things taking often a lot longer than might be expected. Interestingly, during COVID, we've kind of gone to a different extreme in terms of things are happening very, very quickly, especially around the food response that happened in the initial stages of lockdown, of a lot of people needing food and being unable to access it. So groups setting up really, really quickly in order to deal with that, and then just trying to work out how we can support in a way that's going to benefit for the long term. But the main thing I was going to focus on was the complexity of the problem and the complexity of the solutions. And I think it's quite interesting because people are generally in agreement that we should have a better local food system where everyone can access and afford good quality, nutritious food that doesn't harm the environment. But what this actually looks like is far more difficult. So we need to do things like square the circle of the fact that on one hand, food is too cheap. It doesn't include hidden environmental costs. It doesn't always provide a living to the producer. But in Cardiff, we also have 40% of people worried about being able to afford food. So it's really hard problems to deal with, especially on a really local level. So we're, in terms of getting over these obstacles, it's really about looking at what can we control in a local area and what can we influence outside of that if we can't do anything. And I've just got a quick example of that, is how we're starting to create a network of local food pantries in the city, which are basically affordable food clubs using surplus supermarket food. but then also trying to link that with local production and things like community gardens, to kind of create our own local alternative food supply chain that's a bit more based around social goals. So it's tricky, and I don't think we've got all the answers, but I think it's just that stepping back and looking, what can we control and what can we achieve.
Thanks. Just a quick follow-up to that. To what extent do you yourself, Pearl, engage in what might be called more sort of traditional campaigning, you know, pushing for policy change or for, you know, change to the rules in one way or another?
Yeah, so we're actually quite an interesting time, because we did just used to be Food Cardiff, and evolved out of Food Cardiff as a new organisation, Wales, which aims to do a bit more of that kind of influencing and advocating for a better local food system and a better food system in Wales. So we're working quite closely through Food Sense Wales with things like working with Welsh Government to advocate for the changes that need to happen. But in terms of what we're doing in Cardiff, there's a kind of new strand to our work that we're looking at, which is around the good food movement and how kind of citizen voice in and people living or residing in Cardiff, how their voice can be heard and kind of channeling that. So we've been doing it to an extent, but really looking forward to build on that in the next year or so. We've actually got we're planning to pilot some going even more local, some kind of hyper-local food partnerships that can sit within Food Cardiff. And I noticed there was a question around community and engaging communities where that sense isn't there. And that's one of the things that we're kind of looking at that could maybe Jane and John, I need to talk to you about how it could link into some of your hyper-local stuff as well, because not everyone will identify with being part of Cardiff. It might be you're part of Splot or you're part of another local area.
Thanks for that. I mean, that might be a good moment to bring in a question that's been asked here about kind of community and community focused, and for very good reasons. I guess the idea of community is talked about in very positive ways as kind of social capital that can get projects moving and running. But someone has asked here that, you know, the word community or community focus gets brought up a lot. What if there isn't a strong community spirit? Do panelists have any advice about how to foster and develop this? Perhaps I could ask John that question, because I know you've been involved in repair cafes in a few different places, I think.
Yeah, sure. That's a huge question, really, and it's such a, you know, I'm not trying to get away from it, but it's going to vary on place to place, right? What the right answer is. So I guess proviso it with that. But I think having a presence in, and by presence I mean that could be someone talking, or it could be posters, but a presence in buildings that people will use a lot and lots of different people will use is one way to kind of foster a feeling for community, because everyone uses that building, or, you know, not everyone, but a lot of people will use that building. So maybe using locations as a kind of as a hub for a feeling of community. So that could be maybe less and less the post office these days, but it could be even the shop. So a lot of smaller supermarkets on kind of shopping parades will have like a community board and things like that. So it could be something along those lines. Big question though. I haven't got a really great answer off the bat. Sorry. So might come.
No worries at all. There was another kind of community focused question that came up from Neil Lewis asking about the kind of the impacts of the COVID crisis on community and community cohesion. And I think, I mean, there's been so many things happened in the past few months, but one thing that has perhaps been relevant in a number of different places has been that kind of smaller local communities have got together, whether it's on WhatsApp groups or helping each other out and so on, and not to sort of put that on a pedestal or anything, because of course it's very difficult times for a lot of people. But I think it's a very interesting question as to ask, has the COVID crisis in some ways strengthened community cohesion? Are people more likely to work together. Mary, what's your experience and response to that?
I think I mentioned in the presentation, you know, the first week before we went into lockdown, we managed to put together a database of 100 volunteers to help people who were self-isolating. And a lot of those volunteers were new volunteers, because traditionally a lot of our volunteers are over 70, so that they couldn't be on that database. We've just done a survey of those volunteers, and like 92% want to carry on volunteering. So I think Neil's right, you know, that sense of community cohesion, I think it has strengthened. I think that sense of local and appreciation for the local, for communities, that's definitely improved. We can see that with Cadwyn Ogwen. So, you know, people have supported local businesses. And I think generally as well, I think organisations like ourselves, we've been reaching out to sectors that we weren't actively working with before. You know, Cadwyn Ogwen is a joint venture with local businesses. So I think in terms of our sustainability as an organisation as well, you know, quite a large part of our business plan going forward is to provide business support services on a micro level to our micro businesses within the area. So yeah, definitely, I think you know, community cohesion has been strengthened by COVID, definitely.
Thanks for that. Perhaps I'll ask Jane that question as well. With a library of things, has community cohesion strengthened? Has it changed? Have people been more interested in different ways in what you're doing?
I don't think actually that it has made an awful lot of difference to us in a way, because we've not been operating up until August, so we've been shut really. So we haven't been lending items out. We weren't able to do that really because of the restrictions. So, but we do have a paid member of staff, and we had 2 members of staff. Well, there's been a change of staff actually during COVID, and both those members of staff have been working during the period in terms of sort of developing strategies and getting in touch with people and sort of attending online meetings and encouraging the volunteers, keeping in touch with the volunteers, so that we're ready to go. And now, like I said, we're doing the click and collect. But I think, yeah, we haven't. It's not. If we'd been able to lend things to people during lockdown, and I think we would have liked to have done that, but we weren't really able to. I think we're aware that maybe now we want to make sure that we're able to continue to do this in the click and collect, and making sure we've got all the hygiene processes, you know, procedures in place, so that people feel safe to use us. And also we're also thinking about doing a mobile service as well. But yeah, I think. Can I just go back to that previous question as well about the how do you reach communities? And I think one of the important things is just going and talking to people. So like finding places where people are gathered, which obviously isn't easy at the moment, but maybe actually just setting up a stall somewhere in a local marketplace, or just being a presence so that people can come and talk to you. Because I think just reading about things doesn't necessarily make sense to people, some things more than others. But if you can get an opportunity to chat to somebody face to face.
Brilliant. So that's finding those opportunities in person events, or maybe. Okay, that's really good advice. Thank you. We have a question here for Lorraine Whitmarsh, who isn't technically a panelist, but as the director of the CAST Centre, I reckon she can be asked a question. So this is a person from someone asking that they're saying they work in the hospitality industry. There are people from diverse disciplines, age group, etc. do you have any foolproof methods, or let's say if you don't have any foolproof methods, do you have any methods to get people on board to deliver meaningful sustainability and environmental performances? They mention it's an uphill task trying to change human behaviours, and can you suggest any articles or resources?
I don't know about foolproof, and actually I think a lot of the things that have been discussed here today really resonates with some of the research that we've done and other people have done on kind of behaviour change. So I mean, for example, Pearl mentioned about disruption, using those opportunities to actually kind of leverage behaviour change, because we know that habits are a really strong barrier to people's lifestyle change. So people just often continue to do what they've always done, and they don't actually think about doing things differently unless something happens to kind of sometimes force them to think differently or do things differently. COVID is one example, but relocation is another one, either businesses moving or people moving house. Or you could think about retiring or having a child. There are probably lots of things that happen that force people to maybe that are disruptive and force people to do things differently, and it's about using those opportunities to then intervene and get people to do things differently. So we know that generally intervening during those times of disruption is more effective. Another one that's definitely come up that several people have mentioned is about kind of removing the barriers to behaviour change, so making the low carbon or the sustainable thing easy, attractive, normal, the default. So as far as you can, kind of just remove barriers so that it is actually easier and attractive for people to do that. And there's lots of things sort of captured there, but depending on exactly the behaviour that you're talking about, there will be different barriers. But I do quite a lot on travel, and so some of the behaviours are kind of physical, like do you actually have a sort of public transport system near you, or do you have a bike path near you? But some of it might be informational, actually giving people information, skills to be able to do the alternative sorts of things. And we've mentioned skills has come up here as being important to enable people to do new things. We've also heard a lot about kind of sharing good practice, and I would definitely agree that seeing other people actually doing things differently is really powerful, because not only do you then realize it's possible, but also you think, oh well, normal people like me are doing this, so it might be something that I can do, and it just makes it much more real for people, as well as being kind of more attractive and persuasive. So using those kind of social processes, so the face-to-face, the doing things, showing people how to do things is really powerful, and then getting a critical mass. So the more we have other people showing, embodying these changes, the more normal it seems, and then the more people just sort of start to comply with that norm. And I guess linked to that, there's stuff around leadership. So particularly if you're thinking about within an organisation, people from the top embodying the change that you want to bring about, actually, walking the talk, but also embedding kind of procedures and policies that motivate change. So if you're talking about an organisation changing what they do, having the incentives built into things like promotion criteria, or kind of just various sort of procedures within the organisation to get people to incentivize people to do the right thing, I guess. And I guess that there's probably loads. I mean, I can definitely share a link to one of our briefing papers in the chat box that kind of talks a bit about this in quite a brief way, gives an overview of a lot of this evidence. But yeah, there are also other experts here, so that's probably doesn't even cover everything.
Thanks, Lorraine. We're coming towards the end of our time. There are a few other questions to ask, or a few other questions still pending, but I'm not going to go back to those because I don't want to run over time. What I'm going to do now is to hand over to Charlie Wilson, who's at UEA and who's been involved in all manner of research into how change happens over the years. So what Charlie's going to do now is to wrap up our discussion. He has, I hope, been furiously typing down or writing down some notes and reflections on on some of the things discussed. So Charlie's going to I'll hand over to Charlie. Just also to say, for our event tomorrow, Charlie will be chairing that, and our other colleague Claire Houlihan, who works at Manchester and within Tyndall Ancast, will be wrapping up for us at the end of tomorrow's event. So thank you to the panelists and to everyone for your really fascinating insights. I've got my own page of scribbles as well to pick up on, and over to you, Charlie. Thank you.
Thanks, Stuart. Yes, so I've got a large page full of scribbles and the unenviable task of trying to sum up. I think there are some really interesting common themes that have emerged from the discussions. I wanted also just to step back and give a bit of context. Those of you of a similar age to me may remember the 1992 Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro, which was also the year when the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change was signed. So this is 28 years ago. 23 years ago in Kyoto, the world agreed to these emission reduction targets. 12 years ago in the UK, we enshrined in law a commitment to reduce emissions by 80% in 2050. 5 years ago, the world came together again in Paris and agreed this 1.5 warming limit. And over this long trajectory of thoughts and action and research on climate change, I think there's been a growing frustration with the slowness and ineffectiveness of top-down, policy-driven solutions to climate change and a reliance on big silver bullet technologies. And I think over this trajectory of this last 20, 30 years, communities, people, cities, and so on have emerged as the driving force of real action on climate change. And I think what we've heard today reinforces so clearly this evidence that it's grassroots action of the sorts we've heard about which drives real change on the ground, delivering multiple benefits, not just emissions, but other things as well. And that also this grassroots action legitimizes, creates a stronger constituency for policymakers to get their act together, and that maybe we've heard less about this today. So it's been this wonderful opportunity to hear about, to learn about, and to sort of revitalize through these inspiring stories, revitalize our own sort of energies in this respect. There's clearly not a single universal toolkit for how to do this, but there have been, amazingly actually, unlike academics on a panel where everyone disagrees, there's been some wonderful areas of agreement between the panelists. So with respect to how to actually do this, how to make change happen on the ground, people, clearly immensely important, the passion, the commitment, the time of people involved. Securing the resources, whether they're financial or a space or different income streams, etc., also came out repeatedly. Shaping and making the projects and initiatives accessible to the community and focused on the community, so there's a sort of sense of ownership and belonging is important. Tackling multiple challenges, recognizing that problems in the real world are rarely single issue problems, and so trying to work out ways of tackling multiple challenges in parallel or together is clearly important. Thinking about how to spread the word through social networks, whether it's through actual word of mouth, whether it's through social media and so on, is clearly important for creating this ripple effect. Having appropriate organizational forms is important in some cases, whether it's social purpose companies or NGOs or whatever that might be. And then we heard some really positive examples of how this really horrible disruption from COVID was able to be people were able to find a positive way out of it by using or making use of people's willingness to volunteer and commit, or the disruptions that had caused to people's routines, which opened up these spaces that Lorraine was talking about for change. So some common themes that I think came out of our panelists' stories. And with respect to some of the obstacles, I mean, clearly, these issues that are being tackled are not simple. They're these highly complex issues that need some time and brain power and discussions to work out what to focus on. In some cases, like finding the community spirit or the community energy to tap into may not be straightforward. So important to be able to work out how communities interact and to try and tap into that and talk to people. But possibly, again, the most important thing I think came out of the obstacles discussion was the importance of people again, the need for persistence, the need for resilience, the need to sustain commitment and enthusiasm through the inevitable obstacles and barriers that will be thrown up, and the ability to adapt to the sort of changing landscape. So if I had to draw two very broad insights that for me came out of the discussions as a whole, one was it's people. It's really, really about people. And we've had some wonderful examples from our 4 panelists today of the importance of people in driving grassroots change. And the second is that tackling climate change is rarely just about tackling climate change. It's seeing climate change in the context of many other social, economic, and other issues. And actually that sort of approach is far more successful as an ingredient of the stories we've heard today. So I would, just like to echo Stuart in saying that I've found this really, really inspiring. And there've been some really important lessons, I think, for all of us to learn. So thank you very much indeed for all the panelists. I don't know if, Stuart, you want to just have the final word there?
Oh, well, I should let someone else have the final. No, I'm going to let Mallory have the final word. I'll ramble for a moment so that she could think of a final word to say, but I think it would be nice to hand over to our speaker to give a final comment on her story of change and how others can look to pursue their own change. But just to quickly add that we have another event tomorrow at the same time, 1 p.m. I'm afraid it's not going to be every day. We've just got 2 at the moment, but hopefully we'll have future events that you can all join us on. So I'll hand over to Mallory, and if you want to say goodbye at the end, we can all do the little red button, leave the meeting thing at your instruction. Thanks.
Thanks, Stuart. Just agree 100% with what Charlie summarised. Basically, it's down to people, and climate change is not a singular issue. For us in Dyffryn Ogwen, as I mentioned at the beginning, our journey, we've come from a very small organisation which was strong in terms of community development. Sustainability is now at the heart of everything that we do. And mainstreaming, sorry, it's such a jargon word, but sustainability does kind of blend into any project that we deliver now. So work with your communities. There's some good people out there, and good luck.
Thank you, and goodbye all. See you again.